Hello world and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Winelect, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to set up a Docker and Kubernetes development environment using the command line. Hi guys, today I'm going to take a break from the usual Azure content that I usually do to show you how to set up an environment for Docker and Kubernetes for local development. Now the reason I'm doing this is due to some of the changes in Docker for desktop, which is a great utility. It used to do a lot of the automation for you for spinning up like a small Kubernetes cluster for development or creating a Docker context that you can use to build containers locally. Now I want to get that same kind of behavior in a local dev environment, but I want to do it without Docker for desktop, and that's my intent for showing you this. So the assumption is that you're going to be working on a Windows environment and that you have availability to you open source software that you can install on that. So we're going to be setting up Docker and we're going to be setting up Kubernetes, but I'm going to show you how to do this using the command line on a Linux virtual machine. And the reason why I want to do it this way is it exposes you to a lot of the underlying workings of Docker and Kubernetes in a Linux context, and it will show you how you can get a little bit more familiar with these tools and get you a little bit more exposure to actually how these utilities work under the hood so that you can better understand them. Because Docker for desktop did a great job of obfuscating a lot of that complexity away, but in my experience, the more I've learned about Kubernetes and the more I've learned about Docker and how they work under the hood, it helps me become a better Kubernetes or better Docker developer. So you can follow along with this. All the commands I'm going to be running, I'm going to put down in the video description below, but you can copy and paste those into your context for whatever that might be. And you can follow along and set up your environment, but hopefully you'll learn a little bit about what goes on inside of Docker and a little bit of what goes inside of Kubernetes as we walk through this. Now, to make this work, I'm going to be using Ubuntu. Now, you can use other distros if you want to figure out how to make that work, but I'm going to be specifically talking about Ubuntu in this context. Now, you could probably use any modern version of Ubuntu, probably 18.04, 20.04, 21.04, 19, whatever version that you might have available to you. I've installed it and it's vanilla in that respect. So I'm going to be working with a brand new clean Ubuntu VM, and this is the VM. I just set it up on Oracle VirtualBox. Now you can use any hypervisor because this does not require a specific hypervisor to use. You can use any hypervisor that you want. You can use Hyper-V, you can use VMware, you can use Fusion, whatever it might be, but I'm going to be working with a VM that I installed on VirtualBox, and now it is up and running. And the only thing that you'll need to get is the IP address because we're going to need to get an SSH shell into this particular VM. And so I already know mine. So I'm going to go ahead and SSH into this box using this terminal right here. I'm using Windows Terminal with PowerShell. You can use command prompt, whatever you've got. But in any case, I'm just going to SSH into it. And there's nothing on the command line that you need to worry about. So I'm just going to SSH right into this box here. And it's going to put in a password. It's the first time I've ever touched this. And now I'm into this box running on my virtual machine here. So the first thing I want to do is install Docker. And to do this, it's very easy to do in the context of setting this up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get root access. I'm going to do sudo-i, and that's going to give me root access to my VM. So once I have root access, I'm going to run a script that is going to download and install Docker. Now, to get this script, I'm just going to download it from Docker, and it will add the repositories to my VM, and then it will just use the package installer available to me to install Docker. So I'm going to run curl command, and that's going to download the script. Now, to actually run the script, you just basically call a shell and run the script with this, and that's going to install Docker. And so we'll come back when this finishes. So when it finishes, you'll see the output like this. It says to run the Docker now as a non-privileged user, you can run this command right here if you just want to copy and paste that in. That'll install the Docker tools locally, but it's really not what I'm interested in doing. I'm more interested in being able to connect to this instance of Docker from Windows, which is what I'm going to try to do. Now, this should have installed the ability to just run some commands. So if I do docker ps-a, there's currently nothing running here. It's just an empty install of Docker, which really doesn't get me much. I want to be able to connect to this from my Windows box, and then that will allow me to run everything in my local dev context against this Linux VM, and I can build images, push images, pull images, and do all that from Windows. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. So to get the ability to connect to this virtual machine with a Docker client, I need to change the host settings for this particular Docker instance. Now, there's a way to do this using a daemon file, but that's typically not going to work very well in this particular way that this is set up. So we have to edit the actual service file on Linux to do this. So to do that, I'm going to use nano, and the file is located right here at this path. So lib systemd systemctl.service. And if you open this up, there is an exec command right here that will start up Docker. Now, for some reason, this requires that you put an empty line right here that's empty like this, ExecStart. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in another host into this particular ExecStart line right here. So to do that, I'm just going to put my cursor right here, and I'm going to paste in this particular line right here. So -h tcp://0000:2376. That's the default port that it's typically going to run on if you're using TCP sockets. Now, by default, it's typically going to run on a Unix socket and not expose it to TCP. Now, the reason you want to be able to expose it to TCP is to allow external clients to connect to it. Now, this is not going to be secured, so it won't be good for a production environment. In fact, if you want to make this more secure, you can put this on localhost for 127.0.0.1 and 23.76, and then you can use SSH port forwarding to port forward a local port into this dev environment. Now, because this is running on a virtual machine in my local dev environment right here, that's not going to matter to me. I don't care that much about it because I'm the only one that can access this VM, and it's not exposing anything to the public. So exposing it like this is going to be just fine. So once you have that, you can write this file out and then just do Control O and hit enter, and that's going to write the file, and then hit Control X. Now what we need to do is go ahead and reload the configuration and then restart Docker. To reload the configuration that we just edited, we're going to go systemctl or systemctl, and then you go daemon, and then -reload. And what that's going to do is reload all the settings, all those service files that we have inside of that system folder there, including the docker.service. And that will reload the settings into the memory of systemd. And then we're going to do systemctl restart Docker. And that's going to reload the Docker daemon. And this usually takes a few seconds, but it's going to start it up on that port that we just opened on the start configuration for this particular daemon that we're configuring right here. So now that we've got the daemon exposed in the network, we can download the Docker client. Now to do that, you can paste in this URL and download just the CLI utility. So I'm going to get the latest version, which would be 17.09 right here for the community edition. And you can open this up and show in folder, and it's going to have the Docker daemon inside of it, or the Docker CLI, not the daemon. And you can just basically extract this into a folder. Now, what I need is just docker.exe. I don't need dockerd.exe. So I'm going to copy this folder out. And I've created a folder on my C root here called docker-dev. And I'm going to paste it right here inside of this folder right here from my 7-zip folder. And now I've got the Docker utility right here. And now to get access to this, I need to create a path to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it some environmental variables to grant me access to this particular instance of the Docker client, so that whenever I go to the CLI, I can just type in Docker without having to type in the full path for this particular executable. So to edit the path variable, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to open up a new instance of Windows Explorer. I'm going to right click right here and go to Properties. And then I'm going to click on Advanced Settings right here. And then that's going to pop up a window that looks like this called System Properties. I'm going to click on Environment Variables. And then you're going to have a path folder. And you can have system, you can add it to the user path, or you can add it to the system path as well. I'm going to add it to the user path. And here you can have a new one, and it's just going to be C:\\/ docker-dev. Now, whatever you call that folder, doesn't matter. I'm just going to stick it in right there. And then that's going to make the search path available to that docker dev folder. So anything I put in there is going to be a part of the path search whenever I just type in a command at the CLI without the full path for it. Now, I'm also going to stick the Kubernetes utility in there as well. So they'll both be located at that same path. Now you click OK, and then click OK. And then that sets your environment variables. So to test that out, what I need to do is close out terminal. I've already closed mine out. So I'm going to relaunch Windows Terminal. Then I should just be able to type in Docker, say version, and that should give me some output like that. So that validates that my path has been set, and it's currently being able to find that inside of my folder that I just set. So this is giving me some kind of error right here because it's unable to connect to the Docker daemon, which we're going to fix that in just a second. But I'm just validating that I've got the client installed correctly, which I do. So to get the Docker client to connect to a particular daemon, what I need to do is set a host variable inside of my session right here. Now to do that in PowerShell, I'm just going to set an environment variable. Now you can do this in whatever your context may be. If you're in CMD, you can just use set. If you're using PowerShell, you can do something like this, where you have $env : Docker host equals, and then you put in the IP address for your host, which would be my virtual machine, then port 2376, because I exposed that over that particular port and I made it more or less public to my development environment here. Now, if you wanted to secure that socket, you'd probably only want to expose that, like I said, to the local host and do a port forward. You use something like Secure Shell with SSH. Now, once I have this set, I should be able to type in a Docker command like docker ps-a, and then that's going to use this Docker host right here to run this command against. And currently I'm able to run the command because that is looking at this particular host that is exposed on that given Docker daemon. So if you can do this much, that means everything is working. So if I want to make that permanent and persist that between all the sessions, I can add it to the environment variables like I just did for the path. So let's go and edit those, and we can make this a more permanent fixture so it'll be true across PowerShell, CMD, whatever my environment might be. So to make it permanent, I'm going to go back over here to this PC. I'm going to right click, go to properties, and then I'm going to go over here to advanced settings. And then I'm going to edit my system properties by editing my environment variables right here. But instead of editing one, I'm going to go to new, and I'm going to type in Docker and do _host. And I'm going to put in the IP address for my virtual machine. And then I'm going to put the port number in, 2376. And that will make this permanent. So I can then click OK and OK. And now that has been added permanently to my environment variables for this user. Now you can make a system-wide if you add it to the system environment variables. Now to make that stick, I'm going to have to close out the terminal. And if I come over here and launch the terminal again, I shouldn't have to set that environment variable anymore. I can just type in docker ps-a, and that's going to give me a list of the running containers. If it didn't have that Docker variable, it would have given me an error, unable to connect or something like that. So I know that's working now. So to validate that Docker is running, I'm just going to run a simple Docker image right here to build it. Then I'm going to basically copy some index.html file right here, this one right here, into an Nginx image. And then I'm going to run that and expose a port and see if I can connect to it. It's a very straightforward demo, but it should validate that everything is working well in the Docker context. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to run Docker build, and I'm just going to give it a tag name, call it my image, and run it against the local Docker file. Very quick build on that one. So everything's working on the build context. So let's go Docker run. And if I map a port, I'm going to map port 8080 from the VM's port to the Docker host port with the Docker images port, the Docker containers port 80. And then I'm going to call it my image for the actual image name. And if I do a dash name, I say, let's call it Nginx just for good measure. And that's going to run this particular image I just built as a container called Nginx right there. Let's go ahead and run that. And it's running it in the foreground, which is fine. I can hit Control C if I want to type in Docker PS. That's going to give me a list of the currently running images right there, and it's been up for 5 seconds, which I expect. So if all goes well, I should be able to launch a browser window right here and then type in http://10.0.0 or 10.0.1.52 8080, and you should see Blaze's HTML right there, which it means that I'm connected to that particular container in my Docker context. So now that we've done the Docker setup, I'm going to go ahead and do the Kubernetes setup. And this is pretty straightforward too. It's a little bit more involved in getting the client connected, but otherwise it's going to be a very similar experience. So the environment that I'm going to be installing is Minikube. Now you can use one of the other ones out there, but I'm going to be using Minikube. So that's one I'm going to show you how to install and set up. It's very easy to do. So let's go ahead and do that. But to do that, I need to SSH back into the box that I had already set up. So I'm going to go 10.0.1.52 and let's get connected to this guy. And let's get to root again. So sudo -i, and that's going to get me root level access to this box. Now to download Minikube, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to run another curl command here, and it's basically going to download it from Google, and that's who maintains Kubectl and Minikube. So I'm going to download this one, and it's just going to download it to a binary file. And the next thing I need to do is copy that over to a folder that will allow me to access it as a daemon, or a utility rather, and I'm going to use the cp command to do that. So I'm going to go cp minikube into user local bin minikube, and that makes it more or less universally available anywhere on the file system without having to type in the path. I'm going to change the executable using chmod, and that's just going to add an executable flag to this particular utility, and then I'm good to go in terms of downloading and setting up Minikube on this local environment. Now I need to set up a Minikube context, which is what the Minikube utility is going to do for me. So this has one dependency that I need to install before I run the start on this, and that's called contract. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it's just going to install this little package on my local dev box here. And once I have that set up, I should be able to run Minikube start, and that's going to run start finish and set up a new environment on this particular box using the Minikube utility. So this can take a while, so just buckle in and let it finish, and then we'll come back when it's done. So to get the client configured, we need to move the client configuration off of this box right here that the virtual machine set up onto our dev box. And we're basically going to have to move the configuration and a couple of certs over to this client box that is going to connect up to this virtual machine right here. Now, all of that is stored in a directory I'll called root/.kube. So if I go here and I do a list on this, I'm just cd to it and then list it, we're going to see this config file right here. And if I type in cat config, what we're going to see is the configuration for our environment. Now what we need to do is move this configuration as well as these certs right here to our client. So I'm just going to basically take this stuff and copy and paste it in a couple of files, and then I'm going to download and install the actual Kubectl client, and then I should be able to connect up to this. So let's go ahead and do that much as well. So to do this, I'm going to pop open a Explore window right here. I'm going to go to c:\users and get into my local folder right here. Now this will list all the folders I currently have, and if I don't have one called .kube, create one called .kube, and this is where I'm going to stick all the files that I'm going to be using. Now we'll need to create a file here, and I'm going to create a new file called just config. There's no extension, just config like that. And I'm going to say yes, I'm going to change the extension. I'm going to open this guy up in Notepad++, and then I'm going to edit this guy like this. So I'm going to come back over here to my terminal and basically just copy the content that I got out of my local config from my Linux VM into this file right here. And I'm just going to copy and paste that in and save the file. Now, I also need to get the contents from this right here. Now to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder inside of that Docker dev folder that I have right here called certs. And I'm going to put the certs for this particular client in this folder right here. So I'm basically going to need 3 files. I'm going to need ca.cert, client.cert, and client.key right here. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new file for each one of these. So I'm going to create a new file right here, call it file ca.cert, and yes, I'm going to change the extension, and then I'm going to do the same for client.cert and new file, and change the extension here, just because these are all new files. And then I'm going to do one for the key file, and I'm going to do a new folder file right here called key. Now I've got these are just 3 empty files right here. There's nothing in them. So I'm going to go ahead and edit these. So the first thing I need to do is just get the contents of each one of these files right here for my configs. So I'm just going to do this right here. I'm going to come back over to my terminal. I'm going to cat each one of these. Now you could download these through FTP if you wanted to. I'm just going to cat the results and then paste it into each of the respective files. And this is the CA right here. And I'm just going to save it. And I'm going to do the same thing for the client key and the client cert as well. So come over here and just do cat for that particular file. Get the certificate for this file right here. And then paste it over here into the client.certificate, which is, I don't think I have it open. Let's go ahead and open that guy up. And that's going to be over here on my Docker dev. And client.cert. Paste that in, save it, and then do the exact same thing for my client.key file right here, which I'm just going to cat the results for that and grab the contents of this. Now, if you've used Kubernetes already in this context, you may already have a config file that is in there, in that folder, which I would encourage you to rename that and then create a new one, or you can attempt to merge all of the settings into that I'm going to be editing here. But I find it's just, pretty easy just to rename that file and then create a new file. But you can edit this file and then paste in each of these sections right here for this particular cluster, this particular context, and this particular user down here. But I've just basically created a whole new file and pasted the configuration from the Linux box into this Windows box right here for the config file. So now that I've got all my clients certificates copied and saved and my CA cert as well, I'm going to edit this right here to use those new certificates, basically just by pointing these each to the respective path that I'm going to have right here. And to do that, I'm just going to grab the certs path right here, and then I'm going to edit that config file by simply pasting this in and then adding a path from c:\/ docker-dev certs and then the CA right there. And then I can do the exact same thing for these two certs down here. And that is going to just basically create a path for these in this config file. Now, once I've saved off all the certs and I've saved off the config file, I can now download the Kubectl client for Windows, and then I can then connect to it. The only thing that you might need to adjust here is to make sure that the server is correct for your particular environment. Mine is, it's giving me the external IP address, and that's the port that I'm going to need for that. So ensure that that looks right. And if that's all right and you've got your certs there, then you should be able to connect your Kubectl client to that cert without any issues. To get the latest version of the Kubectl CLI, just go to kubernetes.io/releases, and you'll see release histories as of recording this. 1.23.3 is the latest. Now you can click on that, and that will take you to a release page. And you can download the client binaries for your particular platform, which mine is Windows 64-bit. So I'm going to download this tar.gz file right here, and I'm going to open this guy up. I'm going to show in folder, and I'm going to open that in zip. And I'm going to open the archive, and that's basically going to open up the tar file that's embedded in the GZ file, and then drill down until you get to the kubectl.exe. Now I'm going to drop that in that docker dev folder that I created for everything, and I'm just going to place it right alongside my docker.exe. So I've got the client binaries right here for Docker and for Kubernetes, and then there's the certs, of course, that I created just a minute ago. So if all things go well, I should be able to come back over here to my terminal, open up a new terminal window, and just type in Kubectl version or something like that. And that will show me the version. If it's able to find the executable, it should give me some output like this. Now, it does. So let's see if it connects up to the daemon that's running on my virtual machine, and that would be the API server itself. So if I do get pods or something like that, there's nothing currently running, so it should show me no output from that. So yeah, no resources found in the default namespace, which is what I expect because I've installed nothing. So to test all this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Nginx as a pod, and what that will do is that will download a Docker image that will spin it up as a Docker container, and then it will expose it through the Kubernetes instance that I have currently running. And if all goes well, I should be able to connect to that instance of Nginx and use it by simply running a deployment here on Kubectl. So the sample I'm going to be running is this one right here. This is just a simple Nginx deployment using the default Nginx image from Docker Hub, and this is going to be exposing a service. So basically what this will do is deploy 2 instances of Nginx, and this is going to put a load balance service in front of them, and it's going to assign some random port on my IP address for my virtual machine and map that to port 80, which is then going to get mapped back to port 80 in a load balance configuration to these 2 Nginx pods that are going to be running in containers. So very straightforward, but it will demonstrate that everything is working okay on Kubernetes as well as Docker under the covers. So I've got my terminal up here. Let's get into that folder, which I already am, and let's just run kubectl apply -f nginx.yaml, and that's going to create the deployment and the service. So if I want to get that, I can just run kubectl get and get services like that. It's going to show me what's currently running. So there's my Nginx service. It's got an in cluster IP, and it's on port 192, which is the external port that's mapped back to port 80 right here. And if I wanted to get pods, I can list the pods that I have currently running in this context as well. And there's my 2 Nginx pods that I've currently running for this deployment. So if I pop open a browser window, I should be able to do HTTP : and then put in the address of that virtual machine, which is 10.0.1.52, and then put in the port number that I just copied, and should be able to see Nginx running right there, which we do, and that's what I expect. So if I remove this, let's just say delete instead of apply, delete -f, everything's gone, all my deployments are gone. This should not be there anymore, and it's not. It's just spinning, giving me cannot be reached. So that validates that I am running something under the hood there that was running on my particular node port, and that's what I was using to expose it. So again, here you see everything is working just fine. Hopefully this has been a good experience for you for setting up a dev environment for your Kubernetes and Docker development needs in the Linux context using a Windows client. So I've used this before in many other contexts. Now, if you can use Docker for desktops, then that's going to be great. There's probably other ways to do this, but this is how I like to do it because it does help me get a little bit closer to the metal without all the abstractions that Kubernetes utilities typically apply to this, as well as the Docker utilities. But in case this will get you an environment that will allow you to run Docker, to run Kubernetes, and do all your dev work within whatever IDE that you even want to use if you set those environment variables and you map the path to those particular clients that we installed. So it should work for Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or any of those other environments as well. If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintelect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintelect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintelect on Twitter at WintelectNow or at Wintelect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintelect.com. Until next time, thank you.